Today's lecture is really brief. Today we just finished sort of summarizing the purpose of cell respiration and how that fits in with photosynthesis. So, photosynthesis and cell respiration are closely related to each other because in cell respiration, oxygen is taken in, and then organic compounds like glucose. Now, just a reminder, the formula for glucose, because you're going to see this a lot as we go through this lecture, C6H12O6, so that's glucose, and that's broken down into carbon dioxide and water. And then the cell captures energy during this process. Glucose does not turn into ATP. Be sure you understand that. Remember, we talked about this yesterday. ADP gets a phosphate added to it to make ATP, but that process requires energy. So the energy, when glucose is broken down, is used to sort of power forming the ATP. And then, because ATP, that phosphate bond, is sort of this unstable high energy bond, when it breaks off again, the energy will be released from the ATP. All right? Now, there's a question here. What is misleading about the following statement? Plants perform photosynthesis, animals perform cell respiration. And we actually talked about this already, but just a reminder, remember that plants can do both. So plants do photosynthesis, which allows them to make sugars and other things. And then whenever they need energy, they still need ATP. They still have mitochondria, all of that, but they don't have to eat their food. That makes them autotrophs. They can make their own food from the sunlight, and then they can use that for cell respiration. So animal cells do perform cell respiration, but actually all cells, all living cells perform some form of cell respiration. Now we will talk later about how when bacteria do it, they do not have mitochondria, they don't typically use oxygen, and so they do something called anaerobic respiration. But all cells need energy. All cells, including bacteria, make ATP. But plants, in addition to being able to make ATP, which is their cell's energy source, they can make their own sugar that they can then turn around and use. All right, so here's sort of the whole thing. So this is the original energy source is our sunlight. Plants can capture the energy in sunlight using photosynthesis, and they make organic molecules like glucose. I say that it could be other molecules because that glucose could also get turned into sucrose. Some plants store energy, like potatoes, as starch. But ultimately, glucose is sort of the first thing that's made. Then, as plants, animals, any organism needs to extract that energy for cell processes, the mitochondria is typically involved, and we generate ATP. And we actually lose a majority of that energy ultimately as heat. That's sort of like the final form of energy. So one thing you should notice is this is a cycle, but what's cycling is the molecules, the oxygen, the glucose, the carbon dioxide, and the water. Those are getting cycled back and forth. But the energy is not. The energy flows. It gets captured by the sunlight. It ultimately gets turned into heat. Some of it becomes ATP, but then that ATP is used to power cellular work. So the energy ultimately, even though it can't be created or destroyed, is sort of lost from our cells and kind of released into the atmosphere. All right, so respiration and cell respiration are not the same thing. So just to clarify, respiration is breathing in and out, right? So that's actually respiration. It is related to cell respiration, though, because remember, cell respiration in our cells typically needs oxygen. Well, how do we get our oxygen? Breathing. So respiration, in general, the breathing part, brings the oxygen to our cells for cell respiration. And then the whole reason we have to exhale is we get rid of the carbon dioxide that was made as a waste product, again, of cell respiration. So they are closely related, but they're not the same thing. So just make sure you know that. Now, I don't know why they put this checkpoint question here, because you really cannot answer this question until much, much later in our lecture. But since it's here, we'll go ahead and answer it very quickly. The answer is no. The oxygen that a runner exhales is actually not the same oxygen atoms that they inhaled from the environment. And the reason why is because we're going to learn that in that formula for cell respiration, you have glucose and oxygen, and you make carbon dioxide and water, and this is not a balanced equation. But what you're going to discover is that the oxygen you breathe actually becomes this oxygen in the water. The oxygen in the CO2 here comes from the glucose. Remember, glucose was C6H12O6. So the oxygen from the glucose is going to become the oxygen in the CO2. So it is actually a very in-depth question to place at this point in the PowerPoint. It's a little strange, but that is the answer. All right, and this is just showing again the relationship between breathing, which is respiration, and then cell respiration. So we bring the oxygen in for cell respiration by breathing. We get rid of the carbon dioxide when we exhale, which is also part of breathing. All right, and this is just showing that, again, the energy flows coming from here. It gets captured into sugars. It becomes ATP. It ends up as heat. So the energy really doesn't cycle through this over and over again. What cycles through it over and over again are the organic molecules, the oxygen, the carbon dioxide, and the water. All right, and the last slide that we did today in class was this one, which is just a quick overview of cell respiration. So here's our formula. So glucose and oxygen come in, carbon dioxide and water come out, and ATP is generated as a product. That's kind of our goal. The carbon dioxide and water are sort of just waste products. And it's going to be broken down into 3 main steps, which we're going to go through over the next few days and into next week. And that's glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. This is a mitochondria. The worksheet that you did, you had to label some parts. So it has 2 membranes. That goes along with endosymbiotic theory. It has an outer membrane and an inner membrane. It has these folds. The folds are called cristae. So this is a cristae, this is cristae, this is cristae. So technically, a lot of people get confused between what's the difference between cristae and the inner membrane. The inner membrane is the whole thing. Cristae is sort of a word for these folds. The matrix is the center area. They have it colored like as if it's full of water here. And then there was something else I asked you to label on the worksheet, which was what was called the intermembrane space. Inter means between. So the intermembrane space is just the space between the outer membrane and the inner membrane. So all of this area, I could actually highlight it with a highlighter here. All of this here, green's probably not the best color. All of this is the intermembrane space. So again, it's not really coloring very well on it, but all of that. So I don't think you can. So that's intermembrane space between the outer membrane and the inner membrane. And all of those are going to play a role in cell respiration. It turns out different steps happen in different areas. And so that's what we're going to be walking through. All right, and that's it for this lecture.